Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and anyone anywhere above or in between. This is Virginia, and welcome to my channel. Today, I am doing a new type of build for me. A build that's not based on an actual historic building, rather a historic style. I'm making a traditional Japanese style home. The reason I decided to go in this direction is, honestly, I got too excited about the new plethora of random debug objects that got unlocked for us in the new update, and I got this random idea to do builds inspired by one specific object that they unlocked. So, for my first attempt at random object-based builds, I decided to go for something a little bit easier than, say, like a giant water tower, and went with this beautiful cherry blossom arch that you can see kind of sitting in the corner of the build the whole time. Well, what should you do with a beautiful cherry blossom arch? Well, travel to the land of the rising sun, of course. Their national anthem is literally called Sakura, which means cherry blossom. So we're going to Japan. Anyway, I actually wrote a short story based on the Tokugawa era of Japan, which is the Edo period. So I have a reasonable backlog of historic Japanese home knowledge, and with my powers of useless knowledge combined with my want to create random builds, I came up with this. So this build runs you around 70,000 simoleons. It is a 2-bedroom and single bath, but you will note that the bathroom is done in a very traditional Japanese style, meaning that it's not attached to the house and it is sectioned off, meaning that the toilet, the sink, and the bath itself are all in different rooms. So the lot that I'm using in this is a 30 by 20 or 20 by 30. 20 by 30. Doesn't matter. In Brindleton Bay. Thus why there are so many trees that are always getting all up in my business. So as you can see here, I'm doing a split level style, and that is very traditional for a Japanese home. A lot of them you would actually enter here on the ground level, and then you would jump up a level, but I just decided to do it this way just to make it a little more manageable, and I just like the aesthetic of it. So I know that you're probably absolutely dying to hear all about my knowledge of feudal Japanese architecture. Because who wouldn't be on the edge of their seat about Japanese feudal architecture? So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna let you know the little bit that I do know. So this home is inspired by a traditional rural home during the Edo period. The Edo period was actually a very long period. It lasted from about 1600 until the late 1800s. With the downfall of the shogunate, the end of Sokaku, which is the isolation period of Japan, and the start of the Meiji Restoration. So the Edo period is that long period of peace, basically. The warring states ended. They had peace under the Tokugawa shogunate, and up until the Meiji Restoration. So the roof design of this home, of the homes in rural traditional Japan, were quite steep, and they were thatched, usually utilizing rice stalks and hay for insulation. And the walls were normally timber and perhaps earthen, mostly made with bamboo or cypress skeletons underneath it. So it was very lightweight, but it was also very insulated. I don't actually have the Island Living expansion, and I honestly don't see myself getting it anytime soon. Not for any particular reason, I'm just, like, part of me wants to get it because part of me really wants to play, like, Captain Planet gameplay. I want to create, like, the Planeteers, and they can all be conservationists, and it would be amazing. But I just honestly, that's kind of low on my list of packs that I want to get. So I don't have that new really cool thatched roof, so the one that I am using here is just the regular base game thatched roof. And the wall paneling that I use is actually from Get Famous, of all things. I just thought that aesthetically it looked pretty close to the traditional, like, shoji screens. So about the floor plan of this house, there were 3 sections in a traditional Japanese home. There's the doma, or the ground level, which had an earthen floor, and that's where you would usually enter into. And you usually didn't have to take your shoes off at this point. And that's normally where the kitchen would be. Sometimes there was like a workstation, sometimes they put their horses there. So that was kind of like the dirty area. And then off from the doma, you went into the hiroma, which was usually a wooden floor, and it had the communal areas. Sometimes it had the hearth. It's kind of where people congregated. And and that's when you started getting, that Japanese cleanliness that you're so used to. And then lastly, there's the zashiki. The zashiki is where tatami mats were often placed. And this was for entertaining and where you would house important guests in your home. So the zashiki was normally farthest from the front door. Now, it's not really realistic in The Sims to not have individual bedrooms, because unlike traditional Japanese homes, Sims cannot roll up their beds and store them away. So, instead of making the zashiki for entertaining, I just made it for sleeping. So I basically just turned that section into the bedrooms. So you can actually see me as I'm working on the kitchen area. I want to do kind of a fireplace, and the chimney thing, and I tried to do it kind of in the center because that's a very traditional Japanese way, but because this is a split level house, it actually was pretty impossible for me to do it and keep the roof the way that it is. So I went ahead and just put it off to the side and left it there. So as you probably can tell already, Japanese homes have very different layouts than Western homes, and the idea of rooms is far looser. So many homes were constructed of shoji screens, which is the thin paper walls that, you know, everyone has seen in anime or movies or whatever. And those could actually be easily moved around the home. So sleeping took place in any number of places inside the house. And often during colder months, the family would sleep in the hiroma, which was so they could be around the hearth. Japanese homes are also very open. The Japanese did not try to shut nature out the way that, you know, Western architecture had a tendency to do, especially around the same time period, because light and shadow and, you know, just nature in itself was very important to the Japanese aesthetic, and thus the reason natural light was basically everything. And, you know, their religion and spiritual beliefs and things like that also come into it, but I will not pretend to be any kind of a scholar on Shinto or any type of Buddhism, so not gonna go there. Anyway, now I mentioned that this is based on a more rural style home, so this is a country style house. Urban homes were very different from this style. Houses, the type of house you lived in, was based on what class your family was. So there were merchants, and they often lived behind their shops, and then peasants also often lived in really big row houses. Little factoid, peasants were considered a higher ranking member of society than merchants in feudal Japan, because merchants were basically these slimy money grubbers trying to make some mad coin off of other people's hard work. At least that's how feudal Japan regarded merchants. Anyway, samurai and daimyo were the upper crust and would usually live in elaborate castle-like structures. And the daimyo, who was the lord of a certain province, basically, would often have samurai living within the castle walls, because samurai usually could not legally own land of their own. So they lived in the property of the daimyo that they served. Edo, which is the capital of the Tokugawa Japan, which would later become Tokyo, was designed in this sort of spiral shape, with the shogun's castle actually at the center, and different daimyo homes in Edo spiraled outwards from the castle based on like the rank of the daimyo and how much the shogun trusted them. It's just a little interesting thing there. So Edo itself was super dense, super developed, and really, really super cool. It was... So yeah, the housing that was there was a lot smaller. There wasn't as much room for individual families, and yeah, it was just a different feel altogether. So side note, I just wanted to say I don't actually speak Japanese. I took 3 years of Japanese. I can read hiragana, stumble through katakana, and I know maybe 30 kanji. And just to gauge on how fluent that is, they say you need to know 2,000 kanji to really have a handle on the language. So I am not that. But I can pronounce things okay, thanks to those 3 years. And, like, sometimes I can sing along to anime openings if the, lyrics are in hiragana for children. So that's winning. Anyway, urban homes. Urban homes usually had varnished roofs with tile, as opposed to the thatched roofs. And usually, both urban and rural Japanese homes, this is just an interesting note, they utilized a single post in the center of their home as the foundation, basically. It was the weight-bearing section of the home, so that post was attached to the foundation itself, and everything just kind of branched off of that. And I read somewhere that in Japan during that era, era, if your house caught on fire, it was considered easier to dismantle the house than it was to run and get water, which I thought was pretty funny. And another reason for the design was the seismic nature of Japan, because it is a volcanic island, see Mount Fuji for more information on that. And there's plenty of earthquakes, so Japanese architecture evolved with that little factor in mind. And room sizes were, and still are, in a lot of cases, even in modern Japan, determined by the number of tatami mats that could fit in the room. So tatami mat sizes can vary by region slightly, but for the most part it's pretty standard. And rooms could be 3, 8, 10, 12 tatami. And as I mentioned before, the zashiki was often tatami and reserved for ceremonies or entertaining. And in many Japanese homes, the farther away from the road, the more important you were. So if you were taken back to someone's house and they took you all the way to the back for you to stay, you know that they think you're a big deal. And 12 tatami mat rooms, by the way, are not common. They were regal. That was like shogun, emperor, daimyo type things. Interesting side note about daimyo houses in particular is during the Tokugawa era, all daimyo actually had 2 homes. One was within their province, and then one was in the actual capital of Edo. And their Edo property was where the daimyo's main wife and children would actually stay. And the daimyo would have to make yearly treks to their home in Edo. And this was a way for the shogun to basically keep a hold on the daimyo and to prevent revolts. They had to spend tons of money on the procession getting them to Edo. And this helped with the development of the 5 routes, or the 5 roads, which was basically a highway system that was in large part created due to these pilgrimages. Another side note, I keep saying Edo is the capital, but technically it was Kyoto, since that's where the emperor still lived. But during the Tokugawa era, the emperor didn't really do much. The shogun, or the warlord, was basically in control, and he lived in Edo. Anyway, the 5 routes the daimyo would take in their elaborate pilgrimages to see the shogun were the Tokaido, the Nakasendo, the Koshukaido, Nikkokaido, and Oshukaido. All roads led to Edo. And there is this great book called the Tokadochu Hizakurige, known in translation as Shank's Mare. And it's a comic written by Jipensha Iku about the misadventures of these 2 travelers along the Tokaido. The main characters are Yaji and Kita, and they get into all kinds of mischief, and it was used as sort of a guidebook along the Tokaido, and it sold like hotcakes. It was super popular. And speaking of the Hisakurige, one of the most important things that I learned during my months of research for my writing was how unbelievably wrong most Westerners are about the history of Japan. Because most Western people are often prone to what's called Orientalism. The idea that Asian cultures are these totally alien, ethereal type lands made of honor and duty, silk kimonos painted with sakura. I mean, sure, Bushido was a thing, and filial piety ran the world there, and kimono were amazing, but the Japanese people were just as weird and unsettled as any other people, and their sense of humor and their need for outlets to release the tensions of everyday life was as vibrant and thriving as anywhere else during the Edo period. Take Kabuki. It's amazing and artistic and breathtaking to see, but it's really just a soap opera when you think about it. And in literature, yes, you had haiku and word art poetry and such, but Yaji and Kita of Shank's Mare, they just walk around and get drunk and talk about farts and hit on women throughout their adventures, and it's hilarious. I highly suggest you read it. I know you can get a copy on openlibrary.org for free. I'll leave a link in the description. You do have to wait to check it out, but it's totally worth it. And if you spend any time looking at Japanese prints, you'll see that while their way of life developed pretty separate from Western intervention throughout the Tokugawa era, well, besides the Dutch, because the Japanese did adopt new technologies, but it was just slower, and they looked at it with a more suspicious eye. And samurai did have guns. But the Japanese lived very familiar lives. Like, it's not Lothlorien, you know, we're not looking at a different culture altogether. Well, a different culture, a different species. They had their raunchy weird bits, raunchier than some. You know, see the floating world, the ukiyo, the yoshiwara, the red light districts, and, you know, as Bill Wurst put in his History of Japan, all the sexy time. Anyway, that was quite a rant. Remember, no culture exists entirely in a bubble. Sakoku be damned. And we're all humans, and we all enjoy fart jokes and sexy time. From my lips to God's ears. Whatever that means. Alright, now that I've rambled about Edo Japan for half the video, such is my life. Yeah, so, you know, it's a pretty simple build. There's not a ton to it. It's very livable. Everyone loves a good one-story house. It just makes playing a lot easier. And all I'm doing now, you know, I have that traditional Japanese front garden there, with a traditional Japanese kind of rock placement, where it's very purposeful in its purposelessness. I'm still trying to get a handle on it. But anyway, remember to like and subscribe for more historic-themed builds. You can follow me on Tumblr and now on Instagram. The links are below. And as always, if you have any objects you think that I should make fun, that would make fun and challenging builds, or if you just have some historic build you want me to look at, or if you just have ideas for builds in general, just let me know. I always like doing things that test my patience. It's super duper fun. So go read Shank's Mare, grab yourself a bowl of miso ramen, and contemplate how you've probably never eaten real wasabi. It's just horseradish, people. They're lying to you. And geisha were not prostitutes, samurai were fancy bureaucrats, and teriyaki sauce was invented for white people. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Love you! Bye!